Malcolm from North Carolina, and this is Jenny Danyan from
Chicago.
Our group studied plant morphology, diversity, and elevation in the recent deglaciated areas of the Alpine Meadow.
Our first question was, how does a plant's morphology change based on its elevation? And the line that you see shows our elevation that we started collecting data from 6,600 feet. And on our way down, we made different stops, as you can see. And then our lowest stop was 5,100 feet, which was our last collection. And morphology means, if you don't already know, it means the definition of a plant, of how it looks, its color, its height, and everything that you can see and or study about a plant. The key points that our team tried our best to learn about was, as elevation decreases, the height of a plant decreases, and as elevation decreases, you also notice more diversity in plant species, and also as elevation decreases, leaf shape is more diverse.
Some background information. When we were going down to the different elevations and we were examining our plants, some things we had to keep into account were environmental factors, such as like sun, wind exposure, water exposure, substrate, which is like the soil and the rocks that might be there, the different temperatures, and also snow melt timing, which is like equivalent to growing season. And the instruments that we use a GPS tracker to like track which elevation we were at. We used a ruler and tape measure so that we could get, we could measure the plant, the leaves. We used pen, pencil, and notebook to gather our data. And we used clear Ziploc bags so that when we found a plant, we could like get a little sample and like take it with us so that we could keep observing it if we wanted to. And our procedure was, when we knew which elevations we wanted to go to, we hiked down there because we physically had to hike down there. And when we were at our elevations, we looked around and we searched for our plants because we each have our own plants that we are focusing on. And we collected the samples. And we made qualitative and also quantitative observations. By qualitative, we looked at the color of the leaf, the color of the bark, the shape of the leaves, like how did they change. And by quantitative, we looked at, the height of the plant, like how did it change as we got lower, like how did it change? And we looked also like, the length of the leaves, like did the leaves get bigger or smaller as we went down, based on like, the environmental factors and also the elevations, because each elevation has different environmental factors, and that's what we're trying to see. So we did like 2 studies. The first study, we each chose our own plant. Like we each have our own plant that we focused on. And as we got lower in elevation, we tried to see any changes, any patterns. And then the second study we did, we call it like the BioBlitz. We just gathered like different plants, and we mainly like, the reason why we collected them is because we wanted to see like if there was an increase or a change in diversity, because that's going to tell us like, oh, the lower you get, if you notice that there's more and more types of plants, there has to be a reason for that. So that's what we were trying to see and try to take into account.
All right, so the first thing that we noticed and learned was that the plant height increases as the elevation decreases. So as you go lower, the plants get taller. The first plant that one of us focused on, Jenny, she focused on the mountain hemlock, which is an evergreen tree that's known to grow in the subalpine climates. The plant that I chose to focus on is called the mountain heather, and it's got these like little bell-shaped flowers that can be from pink to rose, like a deep rose color, and it's really low and it's like matted on the ground, so it's really stuck around rocks and all that. The saxifrage was the first one that Elena decided to focus on, but the only problem was that each of us were trying to focus on one, However, once we got past our second site, when we got to our third site, it disappeared. So we realized that it couldn't survive in lower elevations, so we had to choose a new plant. So the plant that she chose to do, which was much more common as we went lower, was called the Arctic lupin. The Arctic lupin. And it's like this purple flower, and it's a kind of pea plant. So once it blooms, it actually has a little pea pod. So the first graph that I'm going to show you is the mountain heather and the lupine plant heights. And we kind of took a recording every time we went somewhere of how tall it got. And as you can see, and as our team noticed, it had a trend in both plants. We decided not to really use the saxifrage because it didn't really survive as it went lower, so we focused on just the lupin. And as you can see, it has a trend going upwards. So the next one was kind of on a bigger scale. The tree got way higher, as you can see. So the tree, it got steadily higher as we went to Site 3. And Site 4, the only reason we don't have a graph there is because we lost some of the information. But at Site 5, it just got really tall, so we had to use a new scale method. So one of the things that all these observations caused us to focus on was what causes the differences in the height. Could it just be elevation, or could it be the things that she said, like, you know, all the different effects of the environment, like, you know, the sun exposure and the wind exposure and how much snow and the growing season. So it's really, there's a lot of different variables that could affect it, but elevation was just the one we chose to focus on. And the next point that we focused on was as elevation decreases, the number of species increases. So that first graph just shows you that as we went lower and lower, there were a lot more plants present. And at Site 2, there was like a very similar amount of diversity in species, so we decided not to collect many there. But as you can see, it's a trend upwards, and so that just means there's a lot more different kinds of plants everywhere that you go. This is a picture of the higher elevation. That's the very highest, the Deming Overlook, and that was at 6,600 feet. And that's a little bit of vegetation that's kind of around the rocks and such, but it's mostly the same kind of like hardcore flowers that can handle that landscape. And this is the lower elevation. This was the Alpine Meadows, and as you can see, there's a lot more flowers, and it goes for a while. So this was at 5,100 feet.
As elevation decreases, leaf shape is more diverse, and this means that the lower you go in elevation, usually or more commonly, your leaves are going to be bigger, but also they're going to be more frail because they don't have to deal with the weather and the winds and the ice and also the snow. But on another note, if you go higher in elevation, your leaves tend to be more thicker, and because they have to deal with the snow, the wind, and they also have parts of the glacier and rocks, and they also tend to be smaller. And as 3 examples, we took some data, and at Site 1, there were 5 different leaf shapes, but at Site 4, there were 7 leaf shapes. 4 of them were new, and 1 was gone, so it was lost. And at Site 6, there were 7 leaf shapes. 1 was new, and 1 was gone. And just so you can look at some leaf shapes, these are 16 different leaves. We didn't see all of them, but we've seen all of these. And if you see the top left, we've seen that one most commonly near the bottom. Also, the one to the right of that, the overate, or it's most commonly found on blueberry bushes. And if you look right under that one, the palmate, which was what the leaves on my flower was, but that's actually not from my flower, that's from strawberry. But if you look to the right of that, the prickly needle, that's one that you would commonly see up high because it's small, they're a lot thinner and tougher for weather.
Just to reiterate, the conclusion that we found was that overall, as elevation decreases, leaf shape diversity increases, the height of plant increases, and the species diversity increases in types of plants. And we also learned some things ourselves.
Plants are much more complex than we originally thought.
Plants can be resilient even in really harsh conditions.
And we also learned that in areas where like the glacier like retreated like a long time ago, such as like in lower elevations, the lower you go, the more vegetation you have. And as we mentioned before, the mountain hemlock, the tree that it was very short, it was like a very short shrub, and all of a sudden it was 30 feet tall, and we wondered, why is there such a big change? So what we were thinking is like, if we were to do a future experiment, we would try to test like the impact of soil moisture, like what impact does soil moisture have on the height differences? Like this, in this question, you know how I mentioned the different environmental factors before? Well, in this question, we're focusing on a specific one to try to see if we could try to get a more specific answer. But that would be like something we would do if we were to do like a different